Greetings all, and welcome to another installment of Kit's Retrospectives. In the last retrospective, I talked about the morality of Fallout New Vegas and how the NCR and Legion aren't exactly the inherent good and evil they're usually made out to be. If you missed that, please feel free to use the on-screen annotation, otherwise I shall continue on with today's retrospective. Well, we made it through 2016, everyone! While it might not have been the best year for everyone, it's now thankfully behind us. For me personally, 2016 was a pretty good year. I got to meet some of my friends and fellow cool people / content creators at MomoCon in May, get my history major started at college in August, and produce some of my proudest content thus far over the year. However, I also learned how much of a luxury free time can really be, and that meant I didn't have as much time to sink into playing new games as I had in the year before. Despite that setback, I did get to enjoy a nice handful of new games, and I'd like to take several minutes to discuss most of them. Just keep in mind that I'm counting games regardless of release date. As long as I played it for the first time in 2016, it will likely be discussed in this video. Some of these were released in 2016, yes, but there are a few less recent games I got a chance to try as well. These aren't ranked in any particular order either. I'd rather simply sit back and talk about what I enjoyed about each. More opportunity to discuss a better variety of games. Now that's something I like the sound of. So gather round everyone and let me share my thoughts on my favorite games I played in 2016. I'd like to start out today's discussion by covering some of the lesser-known titles I got to play last year, just to give more of the niche games the more immediate love and attention they rightfully need. So let's start off with a question. Why am I dead at sea? Why Am I Dead at Sea is a simple little indie game by Peltis Design that gets a surprising amount out of its simple premise and narrative. Set on a small ferry, the game begins with you being murdered, but since you couldn't identify your killer at the time of death, you have now become a ghost haunting the ship, at the cost of losing your sense of identity. Now tasked with piecing together who you are, as well as who your murderer was, you have to investigate the ship's crew. The way that Why Am I Dead at Sea handles this is quite neat. In order to interact with the ship's crew, you have to possess them, allowing you to search the ship for clues of your identity and narrow down murder suspects. However, you can't fully control anyone on a whim. You have to first learn the basic information about that passenger, then you may partially possess them. In this state, you can influence where they move, but you can't fully control what they can say. By turning these drawbacks to your advantage, you can use this to more easily assimilate yourself into the ship's crew and learn more about the others. Once you've learned a passenger's life story, you can then fully possess them, allowing you to make them say things they wouldn't normally say, including confessing information they're keeping to themselves. There's definitely more of a focus on narrative over gameplay, and I'm perfectly fine with that, because the writing in this game is great, with every passenger having plenty of humanizing qualities and standing out in their own unique ways. It does a great job of making you want to learn more about them, not just because you're obligated to in order to solve the mysteries of the ship, but also because they're all interesting to listen to. Another part of the game I quite enjoy is that not only does each character have a different ability to help you look for information, such as searching people's pockets or detecting their tone of voice, but the music even changes based on which passenger you're currently controlling. It's a great detail that reinforces how well this game handles its characterization. I'd love to go into more detail with this game, though I'm at the risk of spoiling plot details if I go any further, and this is definitely a game that's best experienced the less you know about it. After all, why ask me why you're dead at sea? That's your job to find out. Another indie title I'd like to go into detail with is The Great Whale Road by Sunburned Games. The developers had contacted me early last year to gauge interest and help get word out about the game. I'm terribly sorry that it took me this long to finally have a method to properly discuss the game, but it's a perfect opportunity to make up for lost time. The Great Whale Road is, at the moment this video has been uploaded, still an early access title, but it shows wonderful promise. Similar to the Banner Saga, The Great Whale Road is a blend of strategy RPG and choice-based survival, a la the PC classic Oregon Trail. Unlike the Banner Saga, which was set in a fictional land based on Norse mythology, The Great Whale Road is based on early medieval European history, amidst regional conflicts between tribes such as the Saxons, the Picts, the Danes, and the Franks. You choose which culture to follow and serve as a leader to oversee the management of resources to support your people at home, while you take your warband abroad to duel with foes. Battles are card-based. You add your warriors to the field using cards in your hand, and then use additional cards for special abilities. The luck of the draw definitely has its role in the combat system, but for what it's worth, The Great Whale Road looks like it'll shape up to be quite the medieval epic once it's completed. 2016 2016 also allowed me to spot a lesser-known real-time strategy game by the name of Anno 1404. That's the European name, but it still sounds so much better than the generic North American title of Dawn of Discovery. Rather than putting the focus on combat like the Total War series or striving for balance like Sid Meier's Civilization, Dawn of Discovery places the utmost importance on economic matters. I mean, the war and diplomacy are still there, but don't be fooled. Money is the real focus here. The European title of Anno 1404 means in the year 1404 CE, and that's crucial to its economic focus and setting, as the game is strongly inspired by late medieval European trade guilds, merchant republics, and Mediterranean trade. While the game has a story mode loosely based on the history of medieval Europe, as well as scenarios where you get placed in different roles relative to said time period, the majority of the game is spent with the goal of establishing a small town and turning it into a successful commercial hub. This requires resource gathering to keep your population happy and paying taxes. Keep a happy population of peasants and your town begins to include citizens, who require more resources to stay happy, repeating this process so that patricians and noblemen can begin moving into your town. With each new chain of the social ladder you add, the more buildings you can construct for your settlement, but the more varieties of resources that they demand. This will force you to trade with other European leaders, as well as seek to establish trade routes with the Orient and its bounty of exclusive luxuries. The contrast between Orient and Occident drives a lot of the design of Anno 1404. For example, the music is orchestral whenever the camera is panned over European land, but as you move closer to the Ottoman Orient, the Western instruments are replaced with Middle Eastern ones. Building settlements on Oriental land brings its own unique challenges thanks to the desert terrain and different resource types, as well as having to maintain positive relations with the Oriental Sultan. Anno 1404 definitely isn't a game for everyone, but I like the idea of approaching the turbulent era of Europe on the cusp of the Renaissance from a strongly economic standpoint. And there's more entries in this franchise set in different years too, so here's hoping I might have a chance to try one of those in 2017. Segueing from medievalism to bunnies! I swear that looked better on the script than it sounded out loud. Now it's time to talk about Rabi-Ribi, a doujin title by Crest Spirit and Sakai Project. In what I can simply describe as being one of the most anime games I have ever played, you play as a human's pet rabbit who has been turned into a person, but with rabbit ears. Additionally, you get transported into a world inhabited by a bunch of these animal people that are exclusively female, for some reason. It's now your goal to figure out all the mysteries thrown your way as you figure out what kind of world you've been brought into. The game itself is a 2D platformer styled like a Metroidvania, meaning that the game's maps are large and somewhat non-linear, motivating and rewarding exploration for the more curious player. What helps to set it apart is that Rabi-Ribi also takes a cue from bullet hell shooters by having enemies, especially bosses, use attack patterns that require more calculated dodging. As difficult as the game's bosses can be, it's still a solid game and I managed to put a good chunk of time into it. The artwork for this game, both in-game portraits and sprite work, is very well done and suits the game's atmosphere. The level design is nice and varied, with a variety of settings to keep things fresh and fun to play, and the soundtrack is almost criminally underappreciated, balancing out area themes that range from optimistic and energetic to slower and relaxed, with boss themes that suit the often frantic nature of the gameplay. If you're in need of a good Metroidvania-type game to sink some hours into, definitely give Rabi-Ribi a try. It might be a bit on the difficult side, but it's very rewarding to go back, look for items and secrets, and then come back to whatever roadblock you were facing now better prepared. If I may ask another question, have you ever had one of those games that you could summarize as the right game that came at the perfect time? For me last year, that was without a doubt Yume Nikki. In early 2016, my second freshman semester at college felt a bit oppressive. And to put it briefly, I spent the first few months of the year acting more reclusively and solemn than I usually do. Yume Nikki was something that struck a chord with me at the time, and I'd be bold enough to call it one of my personal favorite games now, for how easily I was able to connect with it and become engrossed. Yume Nikki is a surrealist psychological horror game about a young girl named Madotsuki, a hermit who refuses to exit her room, but by sleeping she's able to access a menagerie of dream worlds beyond her room. The ultimate goal is to travel through these interweaving dream worlds in order to collect 24 items referred to as effects, and leave them behind in a nexus at the center of Madotsuki's dream world. These effects, however, can also be used to change Madotsuki's appearance and grant her new abilities, such as a bike to move faster or a snow demon ability that makes it snow wherever she is. Each area in the game is noticeably large and often barren, as if to emphasize either Madotsuki's solitude or the murkiness of dreams, perhaps even both. With 12 primary worlds and plenty of smaller areas between them, there's a variety of locations to traverse from simply wandering around. The game was made in RPG Maker 2003, though despite the tools used to make the game, it doesn't utilize any sort of combat system, let alone a single piece of dialogue. Yes, you heard me right. Other than the in-game instructions and menus, Yume Nikki doesn't feature any dialogue at all. While this might sound like a seriously questionable design choice, it works incredibly well for Yume Nikki's focus on the murkiness of dreams and the escapism they provide. The surreal art style and imagery employed in this game do an excellent job of capturing the often bizarre world of dreams, and the lack of any explanation means that it's up to the player to try and explain what they're seeing. This has led to numerous theories attempting to explain the imagery and meaning of the game, only furthered by the mysterious identity of the game's lone developer, who goes by the pseudonym Kikiyama, who hasn't said a word since the release of their creation. While a game would normally put a lot at risk by going for minimalism, Yume Nikki has managed to pick up a cult following, and having played it for myself, I can definitely say there's a strange appeal to the game, and I guess you could say it's almost as surreal as how it looks. And now for the last of the lesser-known titles. Back in October, I finally had a chance to read into Type Moon's Fate franchise, and with a little help from friend and fellow content creator Maverick Hunter 075, I was able to get a PSP emulator set up to play Fate Extra. In Fate Extra, you play as an amnesic protagonist who gets unwillingly thrown into a competition known as the Holy Grail War, where participants, referred to as masters, fight by using beings called servants, who fall under one of 7 classes that better define their combat role: Saber, Lancer, Archer, Caster, Rider, Assassin, and Berserker. Much like a tournament, 2 masters are matched up and given a week to prepare before they must duel one another. The losing master and servant in their eventual duel must forfeit their lives. No pressure at all, especially not for someone who has no idea about anything going on around them. During the week before each duel, you'll primarily be spending it in the arena, practicing combat with your servant and grinding levels, which gives me the perfect segue to Fate Extra's rather unique combat system. Battles in Fate Extra consist of turns where you and your opponent decide on a sequence of 6 commands, between attack, break, and guard. What ensues is akin to a game of rock, paper, scissors. Attacks overwhelm breaks, breaks shatter guards, and guards counter attacks. The goal is to predict as many of your opponent's moves as possible and counteract them, and the more times you fight a species of enemy, the more of their attack patterns you'll be able to see, making grinding less of a hassle than it is in other RPGs. This also ties into the other activity that you'll be doing with each in-game week, looking for information on your opponent's servant. You see, each servant is based on a famous historical or mythological figure, and if you can learn their real name and who they are, you'll have a significant advantage in the ensuing duel by learning a majority of their attack patterns. It's a great icebreaker between periods of grinding, and it's really neat deciphering the identity of each opponent. The way combat and investigation meld together really makes me think of Fate Extra as being a blend of Persona and Danganronpa, even if it predates one of them. Unfortunately though, I do have my issues with Fate Extra, namely the difficulty. Many of your first battles with new enemies will be spent acting at random in hopes you'll get lucky before you can feasibly guess their attack patterns. Even with full info, duels with other servants can be pretty long battles, easily ended if their servant uses an ultimate attack without you knowing when or how to prepare. And considering that losing any battle equates to a game over, you can see where this can be a bit of a headache, especially since the normal difficulty only allows you to heal through item use. Overall though, is Fate Extra a good game? Yeah, I'd say so. In spite of the positives and negatives that its gameplay tries to balance, it is a nice change of pace from the typical RPG formula, and I still enjoyed it despite its shortcomings. Also, Caster is the waifu for Laifu. That is all. And now for the heavy hitters. Normally, the most time I spend playing games is over the summer, when I get a full-length break from my studies. However, in the last 2 months of 2016, I got to go against that tradition a bit, having been introduced to Overwatch. If you went around asking folks if there was a specific game that you could say stole 2016, chances are most people would agree with you if you said it was Overwatch. Blizzard Entertainment, already riding high off the successes of World of Warcraft and Hearthstone, decided to toss their hats into the ring of team-based first-person shooters, a genre so long dominated by Valve's Team Fortress 2. What resulted not only became a serious competitor to TF2, but has been able to survive long enough for some to consider it a successor. Overwatch saw an incredible leap to popularity and, at least at the time of making this video, has maintained a very strong and devoted player base. Blizzard did a magnificent job with balancing how easy it is to pick up and play with how tricky it can be to find a hero that best suits your playstyle and mastering them beyond the basics. Characters are divided into 4 classes: offense for damage dealing and mobility, defense for holding back the enemy, tanks for protecting allies and distracting foes, and support for healing and buffing, though every character brings their own unique flavor to each class role, meaning that no 2 characters will perform exactly the same in every scenario. Me personally, I like to play Genji on offense, Junkrat on defense, D.Va on tank, and Lucio on support, to fill in each possible team role in case one of the others gets picked by someone else. Each character in Overwatch manages to stand out through their colorful designs, unique approaches to gameplay and countering, and the superb voice acting that does a great job tying it all together. The maps are just as wonderful, full of all sorts of details for eagle-eyed viewers or for teams setting up their defenses. And the variety of locations and asymmetrical layouts provide plenty of chances to experiment with new strategies. Add in an arcade mode full of different modes that change up the gameplay, and Overwatch is a game that does excellently with letting the player get as much out of the game as they want. In essence, practice is a big part of the Overwatch experience. You first try to find the characters that best suit your style, then begin to get a handle on the game's maps, as well as learn which heroes you're best at countering. And once all of it starts to pay off through the loot boxes and collectibles you earn, as well as your in-game skill improving, it's a damn good feeling. I might not be the best at Overwatch, or any good at all, but it's still a very enjoyable game, especially if you have the chance to play it with friends. I have a particular fondness for games I can categorize as Zen games, the kind of thing I can boot up after a long day and just sink hours into while I relax. A few examples of Zen games that I've enjoyed in the past include Sid Meier's Civilization V, Minecraft, Pokemon Conquest, and probably the oldest example I can think of, Harvest Moon: A Wonderful Life. Who knew that the circle of Zen games would come around full circle in 2016 with the release of an indie game by the name of Stardew Valley? While I wouldn't exactly call myself much of a big fan of Harvest Moon as others would, that didn't stop me from getting excited to try out Stardew Valley after hearing so many good reviews of it. In Stardew Valley, you play as a farmer who quits their corporate job, which apparently killed somebody in one of the cubicles next to yours, in order to inherit a plot of farmland in scenic Stardew Valley, courtesy of your grandfather. While the beginning of the game is spent meeting the locals from the nearby Pelican Town, from that point onward, the game's much more open-ended. You're free to choose how you want to spend your time, whether it's socializing with the townsfolk, fighting monsters in the mine, or tending to your crops and animals. There's always plenty you can do with your in-game days. There is something of a story to follow within the game, where you can either restore the Pelican Town Community Center by gathering items for nature sprites to repair the building with, or turn it into a warehouse for the local corporate bastards, Jojamart, as well as marry one of the town's 12 eligible bachelors and bachelorettes, and start a family as you work toward expanding your farm to include animals and even machines for turning crops into foodstuffs. Just like a Harvest Moon game, Stardew Valley is divided into 4 months based on the seasons, with each further affecting what you can do in-game. Winter, for example, may be a poor time for growing crops, but it's perfect for adventuring in the mines or practicing your angling skills for an ice fishing competition. I also love how the background music changes slightly to match each season. Spring's themes are upbeat and energetic, summer's themes remain upbeat but take a slightly more relaxed tone, autumn's themes are a bit slowed and mellow, and winter's themes are quiet and use fewer instruments. Despite being the craftwork of just one developer, Stardew Valley really feels like a full package with how polished it feels and how much there is to do, with each season bringing more villager birthdays, holiday events to partake in, crops to capitalize on, and opportunities to better enjoy your stay in the countryside. It really does a great job of giving you the feeling that you're in a small town away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life, and I'm more than happy to keep coming back to it, especially with new updates being added to enhance the experience. Fire Emblem Fates didn't exactly have the most graceful launch outside of Japan. Many voiced their opinions on the game's localization process as the release date came closer, but for what it was worth, the final product we got was still a good package. In Fire Emblem Fates, you play as a noble in a land divided between 2 warring kingdoms, the medieval European kingdom of Nor and the feudal Japanese kingdom of Hoshido. Specifically, the protagonist happens to have been born into the Hoshidan royal family, but was raised in the kingdom of Nor. And with tensions between the 2 nations at their breaking point, it now falls upon you to decide your allegiance. Fire Emblem Fates did this by bringing a new concept to the series. It was released not as 1 game, but 3, with each following the protagonist's different choices. In Birthright, Birthright, you ally with the Light Kingdom of Hoshido, in Conquest, you ally with the Dark Kingdom of Nor, and in Revelation, you choose not to ally with either nation, forging your own path instead. Each version of Fire Emblem Fates also differs slightly in gameplay too, making each feel like they could stand on their own merits if bought separately. Me personally, I felt that Conquest seemed to have more effort put into its story, since being an agent of the antagonist kingdom allowed for some creative story elements, and it definitely benefits more from having its gameplay structured more like a traditional Fire Emblem game compared to Birthright, which was made to be more beginner-friendly. While the story in Birthright and Revelations may have felt a bit lackluster compared to Conquest, and there's still some general story bits in all three parts that I'm not a fan of, the trio as a whole still boasts a great roster of characters that feel a little less like single trope-dominated personalities, also balancing the unit pairing mechanic to make it less game-breaking, among other gameplay tweaks, and a stellar soundtrack well-suited to the new Celtic and Japanese aesthetics that Nor and Hoshido bring. Maybe it didn't fully live up to the high standards set by Awakening, but that's okay. It still turned out well. 2016 was without a doubt a fantastic year for Pokémon fans. As the series celebrated its 20th anniversary, all three Generation 1 titles were put on the eShop to enjoy on the newest handhelds, Pokken Tournament brought the series into the fighting game genre, and Pokémon Go brought the franchise into the mobile market to a rousing success. But the biggest news of the year was the start of Generation 7 with Pokémon Sun and Moon. Pokémon Go's popularity may have faded for now, but every Pokémon fan was getting a mighty thirst for Sun and Moon by the end of the year. I hadn't been keeping tabs on Pokemon like I used to. Quite frankly, I wasn't too pleased with Pokemon White back when it came out in 2011, so I skipped over Black 2 and White 2, X and Y, and Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. But with all the attention and excitement surrounding Sun and Moon, I did eventually get pulled in. Pokemon Sun and Moon's success can definitely be chalked up to striking a middle ground between new content and keeping things rooted in series tradition. For example, Pokemon gyms have now been replaced with island trials, in which you have to accomplish some sort of task related to one of the 18 types, then face a totem Pokemon that takes the place of the gym leader. Certain Pokemon also have different appearances and typings to suit the different climate of the Alola region. This combined with the blend of new Pokemon and those from the previous 6 generations, as well as the 4 islands with different populations of native Pokemon, all make Sun and Moon feel refreshing enough to retain the series' classic adventurous feeling despite the new content on the table. I also appreciate that there's a noticeably greater emphasis on story and lore building in Sun and Moon, almost like an extension of what Black and White attempted to do 6 years ago, and it does a great job of further conveying the exotic setting of Alola. I'd rather keep the spoilers to myself for now though, as I'd say the story and lore are some of the strongest elements of Pokemon Sun and Moon, and it'd be better if you got to experience that on your own to make of it what you will. To someone that took a break from Pokemon for a few years, I'd say Sun and Moon do an excellent job of introducing someone to the franchise, whether it's your first experience or a return to the series. And finally, I've saved my strongest favorites for last. Normally, I try not to get too carried away with the hype culture that seems to have become synonymous with AAA titles as of late, but oh my goddess did I flip my lid when Sid Meier's Civilization 6 was announced last May. After all, it hadn't been long since I tested the waters by buying Civilization 5, a game that wound up being my favorite title I played in 2015. In fact, I may have been so excited by the news that I pre-ordered the digital deluxe edition of the game on the day of announcement. So after the pain of waiting over 5 months amidst a myriad of updates, was it worth it? You can bet your ass I'm happy with how it turned out. Just like the 5 games before it, the goal of Civilization 6 is to take on the role of one of many historical leaders and begin your nation anew. Building a country from the ground up, advancing from the cradle of society into the Dark Ages and through industrialization into the contemporary world, with the ultimate goal of conquering all of the other players, launching a mission to colonize Mars, uniting the world under your religion, or getting a cultural victory that actually makes sense for a change. Only took you 6 games. Good on you, Fire Axis. One thing I never did mention last year when discussing Civilization 5 was how it was only good as a full package. The game just felt incomplete without both the Gods and Kings and Brave New World add-ons to fix the vanilla game's shortcomings. With Civilization 6, however, the base game already feels like it's on the same caliber as Civilization 5 in its entirety, and it still has the benefit of introducing plenty of new content. The biggest new element that Civilization 6 brings to the series is by introducing districts, areas for increasing your city's stats, or building wonders that take up a separate tile, rather than being part of your city like in previous Civ titles. Planning your districts carefully can give you a solid advantage with any of the game's stats, and wonders have more specific building requirements now to make wonder rushing less of a viable strategy. Additionally, a new civics tree influenced by your nation's cultural output serves as a nice complement to the series' long-standing tech tree, still influenced by your science output. Though a lot of what makes Civilization VI such a great game is not just new content, but also bringing back features from previous Civilization games. Government building is back from Civilization IV, though greatly expanded to provide more opportunities to make a government molded around your playstyle. And the game's superb musical score owes its composition to Civilization III by having themes that evolve to become more complex as your nation advances through time, and also from Civilization V, by using a bass song and instruments native and relative to each nation. It's that wonderful blend of old and new that makes Civilization VI a definite success as a landmark entry for the series. And just think, this is only the base game. There's an exciting future ahead for Firaxis, and I'm hoping the full package of Civilization VI keeps the game's success running strong. If I can be perfectly honest, I'm not a difficult person to please. I like to be an optimist, so I'm bound to get easily captivated by a good game or find redeeming qualities in subpar or bad games. It's not too hard to get me to enjoy a game on its merits, but it takes quite a bit more for a lone game to get me interested in an entire series within the span of just a couple of months like Fallout New Vegas did. Perhaps it might have been an obvious inclusion, but this truly was a big surprise to be added to my gaming library last year. Admittedly, I was very on the fence about whether or not I'd get much enjoyment out of a Fallout game, as I wasn't the biggest fan of first-person shooters, nor did the strategy RPG elements of the original Fallout games appeal much to me. So after reading that New Vegas was generally considered the series' finest entry thus far, I decided to at least try Fallout starting with New Vegas. Fallout New Vegas is set in Clark County, Nevada in the year 2281, 204 years after the United States and China rained nuclear hellfire upon each other in an act of mutually assured destruction. Though the land has had time to heal from the initial wounds of radiation, the country is still torn between factions trying to rebuild society in their own image. While the Las Vegas Strip continues to shine amidst the wasteland, a growing conflict between the New California Republic and the autocracy of Caesar's Legion is threatening the stability of the region, and you, a simple courier operating for the Mojave Express, slowly become a pivotal figure in deciding the fate of the Mojave in the ensuing war. Building off of the gameplay shift between Fallout 2 and 3, New Vegas is a first-person shooter, though there's just as much focus on world building and morality. The game's map is massive and full of all sorts of locations, ranging from desolate to being something of a safe haven. Inventory management is a crucial part of any Fallout game, New Vegas included, as you can only carry so much armor, weapons, and items before it begins to impair your movement speed. A massive disadvantage in combat, especially if you need to make a tactical retreat. But sticking around to fight means that you can snatch up more items, ammo, and armor from your fallen opponents. And for those who want an even greater and more realistic challenge, New Vegas also adds in Hardcore mode, where, among other gameplay tweaks, you have to keep tabs on not only your health, but also your hunger, thirst, and fatigue. Neglecting any of these can mean serious consequences, including death. But most importantly, the reputation system took a huge step up from Fallout 3. While the game has 4 main endings, depending on if you ally yourself with the New California Republic, Caesar's Legion, Mr. House's New Vegas, or forge your own path with Yes Man, there's still several side characters and smaller factions that your choices and actions can impact. And there isn't a truly good or truly evil force in the conflict. Morality in New Vegas is very, very gray, and it all falls upon the person playing the game to make their call on who should live and die in the harshness of the post-apocalyptic Mojave. Fallout New Vegas was a game that very much caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting much from it at first, but it's quickly risen in my favorites and got me to purchase and try out the first 3 Fallout games. I absolutely love how well the game handles its atmosphere and retro-futuristic setting, as well as the ideological conflict between the NCR and Legion at the core of the story. It's also a great story about why you should never anger the mailman. They might just show up on your doorstep with an arsenal's worth of lead, mini nukes, and Tesla cannons. That concludes this series of retrospective thoughts on my favorite games I played in 2016. That was a lot of games to cover, so I sincerely hope I was able to keep things interesting. Thank you for watching, and I'd love to hear what you have to say, so please feel free to use the comments section to leave what you thought about the video. What were your favorite games you played in 2016? Did you play any of the titles I mentioned in this video? What are you excited to play in the new year? Once again, thank you very much for watching, have a good day, and take care everyone!